ディアーネ、ルフィアン、ロリエーン。彼女たちを冒険へと駆り立てるものは
お金が欲しい。
冒険へと駆り立てるものは
お金。
Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Mouse.
And I'm Hayate.
And together we're the hosts of Swan Shootout Radio, a show dedicated to talking about niche Japanese video games. And what you just heard there in the opening is an excerpt from the old Monster Maker drama CD from the early 90s, because today we're going to be talking about the Monster Maker franchise.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a series that started out in 1998 as a tabletop card game before evolving and expanding into a lot of different media, including video games, which is why we're talking about it. But before we get into that, do you want to do our little free talk corner?
Oh yeah, sure. So what games have you been playing lately?
Well, I've mostly been playing Monster Maker 4 to prepare for this, which I'm really enjoying.
Oh yeah.
I had tried to get my hands on this game for a long time, but it's pretty uncommon, and it's hard to find for cheap. So eventually, when we decided we were going to do this, I figured I'd just emulate it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll get more into that later when it comes up during the discussion. But other than that, I've mostly been playing some Lightning Returns on PS3, which is a game that I feel like has a lot of major flaws and poor balancing. But I kind of like farming on New Game Plus, because a lot of that game boils down to like farming abilities and customizing your builds, and you can spend a lot of time getting really, really, really powerful. And it's just kind of a relaxing thing to do when you're listening to music or radio shows or something. So that's pretty much it for me.
Yeah, I would like to revisit Final Fantasy XIII at some point, as well as playing the sequels for the first time. It's a game that I really enjoyed. As for me, over the past weekend, I played a visual novel called Second Love, released in the year 2000. This was the first commercial release by cult writer Yutaka Fukasawa, made on his own developed visual novel engine called Mbook, which is known for its old-fashioned interface and allowing for keyboard inputs during shows. This is it's an old game, and it's one of the earliest types of time loop stories, which makes it a very interesting game to look into. And well, the writer went on to write Shine, which is my favorite visual novel, so I was really excited to delve into one of his older works, and I wasn't disappointed. I really enjoyed it, but it's also very rough around the edges, and you can tell that he's just figuring out what he wants to do. But still, I would really recommend it for those interested in the visual novel medium. I think it's a pretty important work, and it's important. No, it's interesting to mention that these two works, both Second Love and Shine, I think are the two most expensive visual novels in the market today. I've seen Shine go around 300,000 yen or something.
Wow.
So yeah.
And was it just on PC?
Yeah, it was also released in the same year, in 2000, and it's only got one release, and it's gotten very popular for its the nature of the writing. It's kind of hard to talk about with the spoiling, but some people call it a predecessor to the style that Ever 17 kind of made popular in the kind of mystery story. So yeah, that's what I've been reading lately, and I also played Monster Maker 1 and 2 on the Game Boy, which we will talk about in a moment, I guess.
Yeah, very soon. So as mentioned before, Monster Maker started as a card game for tabletop play, and it was one of the first role-playing card games that really took off in Japan and got very popular. And over the years, they published several more editions of the game, including some with like different settings and updated rules and so forth.
Yeah,
But what's your...
I watched
Sorry,
a
go
couple
ahead.
videos. I watched a couple videos of people playing the
Oh,
modern
yeah.
version of Monster Maker.
Mhm.
Seems fun, but a bit simple also.
Yeah, it is a fairly simple game.
Yeah.
In the original one, the goal was to compete against other players. It's a 2 to 6 player game, and you're trying to find treasure in a dungeon by placing down corridor cards. And these corridor cards have a number in the top corner, like 10 or 15, which signifies the distance that you've moved in the dungeon. And once the sum of your corridor cards equals 100, then you've reached the treasure room. And once you've gotten the treasure, you have to make your way back out of the dungeon. The first player to do that successfully wins the game. And so to compete with other players, you can send monster cards to their to like in front of them to block their progress, and they'll have to use their character cards and spell cards and roll dice to defeat the monsters. And there's also trap cards you can send to players, which they need a thief to defuse. It's pretty basic, but if you're interested in all the rules, you can visit monstermaker.jp, which is the official website of the franchise, and they actually have English translations of the card game rules on the website, which I was kind of surprised to see. And granted, the grammar of the translations isn't perfect, but like you can follow it and understand it. So the series quickly expanded into board games, jigsaw puzzles. They had a tabletop RPG, manga, light novels, and obviously video games. So the series was very popular in the 90s in Japan. And I think the key interesting point about the video games is how they tried to honor the tabletop card game roots of the series, both in terms of the game mechanics and also the visual aesthetics. And I think you would probably agree that that's kind of what makes them interesting.
Oh yeah, especially the first two games, Famicom, which have the most interesting design out of the ones I've played.
Yeah, I think Monster Maker 4 is also really, really unique.
Yeah,
and
I saw a bit of
it's
photos
kind
of
of
it.
different. It's kind of different than the original ones, but it definitely incorporates like the whole card system and building your deck and everything. It's pretty unique.
Sounds interesting.
So I think it's probably best to go through the handheld and the console games first, and then we'll go over to like the PC 98 stuff, and there was also a mobile game, but that's probably better to talk about after. So the first one, released in December of 1990, was just called Monster Maker. It came out on the Game Boy. And you just played this, so do you want to start talking about it?
Well, the progression for this game is pretty interesting. It's you start out with your main character, and you're able to recreate characters on the inn. You will pay for these characters, and they will aid you in the dungeons. During the dungeons, you go around flipping cards, which may reveal traps, may reveal hidden passages, or may reveal strong enemies.
And it's pretty interesting the way the dungeons are laid out, because initially you can't see where any of the paths are or any of the walls or anything that's there. It's all covered in cards, and each space that you move, you flip over a card, and that will reveal the path and the walls. And sometimes there's something underneath the card, like a treasure chest or an encounter tile or a trap tile or some sort of object of interest, like a statue you can interact with to teleport somewhere else in the dungeon. So I find a fair comparison to make is that it's kind of like a first-person dungeon crawler sort of dungeon design. That it has these winding corridors, it has one-way walls, it has tiles with objects you can interact with. And if you compare 2D maps of Monster Maker dungeons and something like Wizardry, they look functionally the same. So it's sort of like a first-person dungeon crawler that auto-maps itself as you explore, because each time you flip over a tile or make a space, it's mapping the path and the walls as you move. So if you're someone who likes old-school dungeon crawlers, but maybe you're disoriented by first-person perspectives, or you don't like drawing your own maps on grid paper, this is something you can pick up more comfortably, I think.
This is very true, and it also has some very interesting ideas in the way it lets you assemble your party, as well as later on you can even hire thieves to help with traps during the dungeons.
Right.
And also I really like how the magic system works in the first two games, in which you get your magician character has a set number of MP, and you may trade this MP for magic cards, which also take space in the same way items do. So you may want to organize your your magic in ways that, I mean, you need to plan ahead before delving into the dungeon, and it's something I really like.
It's sort of like you basically spend your MP in advance to decide which spells you want to bring into a dungeon.
Yeah.
And I think it's ultimately similar to spell charge systems that were in a lot of older RPGs like Dungeons and Dragons, or even Final Fantasy I had a spell charge system. But the difference is that you have complete customization over exactly which spells you want to bring and how many charges of each spell you want, as long as you stay within your MP budget. But like if you have 10 MP, you can get 2 heal spells that cost 2 MP each, and 2 fire spells that cost 3 MP each, and that adds up to 10 MP. So it gives you a lot of customization over your mages, and in between each dungeon trip, you can sort of reevaluate how you want to set yourself up. So you can actually choose from one of 4 protagonists at the start, right?
Oh yeah, I choose Tamblin.
Tamblin. I think I picked Diane.
Yeah,
but I don't think the story actually changes at all. It's just kind of your stat distribution.
I don't remember.
Sorry, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I don't remember if you can also choose a magician for the start. I don't think so. I think there was also an elf. But
I played it a couple years ago, so I don't really remember. An interesting point about this game, and I think most games in the series, is that there's no experience points.
Oh yeah.
So the way that you level up is just each time you complete a quest, everybody gains a level. So you don't really have to worry about farming experience. There is money, and you can grind for cash, but I don't remember it actually. I don't remember ever being short on cash in these games.
Yeah, usually I got a lot of cash for the most part of the game.
And you can buy monsters in this game, right? In the first one?
I don't remember buying monsters in the first game actually. I remember hiring the tips only, but oh yeah, I think so. I never really used the monsters in both games, so I'm not really sure if the first game has it.
I'm pretty sure you can.
Yeah.
You can either buy them or charm them into your party.
Oh yeah. You can charm the enemies and make them fight for you.
Yeah,
that is true. Which is why you are prompted to keep one space open in your party. Yeah,
because you can use that space to summon the monster in your party. You get it as a card basically. And the cards are items.
Yeah,
and when you use a monster card, it summons that monster into battle. And that's something that they expanded upon in later games in much more interesting ways.
As for the level system, there's also parts in dungeons which you can really access, which is called kyofu, or kind of like fear. Yeah. So there's a certain threshold you need to meet to really progress through these parts, which mainly contain good treasure or just progress through the main story. Sometimes having stronger party members along with you will also clear the kyofu threshold.
Because it's basically just a level check.
Yeah.
Because the game isn't completely linear, and you have some freedom about.
hmm
Well, there's like an overworld, right? And you can take different paths on the overworld, and there are like dungeons that block your path. And if you clear the dungeon, then you can walk over that tile and move further in the overworld.
hmm
And so the the fear tiles are basically the game's way of preventing you from getting too far on your own, while also giving you some freedom in terms of which order you want to tackle quests. And I think that pretty much covers the first game. It's not that long, is it?
No,
I
it was
remember it
pretty
being
short.
like I remember
But
it being like
mhm,
5 to 8 hours at the most. Probably not even that long though.
yeah.
Five
But
or 6 hours.
since the dungeons and the battle themselves are a bit more difficult and involved than the second
Yeah.
game on the Game Boy, I also think it was around the same length overall. I mean, as for how much it took me to clear them.
hmm I think that the series in general has you can get in situations where like it seems really easy a lot of the time, and then suddenly you encounter something that
Yeah.
demolishes your party.
hmm
And granted, status effects are really useful in these games, so you can learn from those mistakes when you encounter something that kills you really fast. You kind of get the sense that you need to put them to sleep or somehow incapacitate them.
hmm
So the second game released in the series was the following year, in December of 1991, on the Famicom. It's called Monster Maker Nanatsu no Hiho, or The Seven Treasures. And I think most people would agree that this is probably the best game in the series.
Yeah.
And I think one of the best RPGs on the. It pretty much just builds on everything from the first game and adds in some new systems to add more depth to it. And there's actually an FAQ on GameFAQs, which translates all the menus and the item names and the spells and everything in this game, and explains what you need to do to proceed. So even if you don't have Japanese knowledge, you can follow this FAQ to get through the game. And I've heard from people who were able to do so successfully. So if you're interested in this series, I recommend giving this game a try and using that FAQ if you don't know any Japanese, because you can get through it that way. So one of the major things that they added in this game is the ability to engage monsters in conversation during battle. And by talking to them and choosing different options, you can get them to run away without actually fighting them, or to convince them to join your party. And it's very similar to Demon Conversation in Megami Tensei games.
Oh yeah.
And there's actually also a system where you can trade two monsters with an NPC to get a new one, which is again very similar to Demon Fusion in Megami Tensei games. So they were probably looking to that as an influence.
Well, actually, I read that the creator of Monster Maker, Kinichiro Suzuki, is the father of Kazunari Suzuki, who is one of the original developers of Megami Tensei, and he was also involved in, I think, all of the Monster Maker games. So that's definitely something.
I had no idea. That's super interesting.
It says on Wikipedia.
Oh.
Yeah, they're both involved, but Kinichiro Suzuki and his son Kazunari Suzuki. A pretty interesting character, Kazunari Suzuki, if you read about him.
I'll have to look into it later.
So yeah, there's definitely some connection between the two series, which will make it appealing to Megami Tensei fans.
Something else that they added in this game is that in addition to using spell cards to cast magic, now characters also learn 2 or 3 spells naturally, which they can cast whenever they want using MP. But since you only learn 2 or 3 spells, you still do most of your magic casting through cards. And so that system of spending your MP in advance to prepare for dungeons is still very much a part of the game here. And they also expanded upon how different classes in the game worked. Like back on the Game Boy, you had your warriors and your mages and so forth, and thieves. But in this game, they added some more systems to them that give them some more utility in and out of combat. For example, elves and cat people have a very good sense of smell, and so when you encounter a spring in a dungeon, these springs can have different effects, like healing your party, or poisoning you, or paralyzing you, or all these different positive or negative effects. And the elves and the cat people, since they have a good sense of smell, they can identify what the spring water is going to do with a high probability, and that helps you navigate dungeons more safely. And thieves are now playable in battle. I think in the first one they were only
they were
higher temp. Yeah, but now they're like other characters that you can use in combat, and they're the best for disarming traps, which is really useful because traps not only damage you, but they can also like be trap floors that send you down a floor, which is super annoying if that happens. So having a thief definitely makes traversing the dungeon safer. And I feel like that they basically just added more of everything and better in this game. Like the dungeons are more larger and more involving. Different keys that open locks, which I think was in the first game as well, but it's more of a thing.
It really maintains the essence of the first game, which I really liked. I think this is really what makes Nanatsu no Hiho the most well-realized game in the series.
Yep.
And the most unique in a sense, I suppose. Since we will see in further releases that it kind of starts getting more standard JRPG.
Generic, yeah.
Yeah.
And you still have a lot of freedom over your party composition, and there's a lot of characters in this game that you recruit at guilds. And for some dungeons, you need a particular character in your party. Like I remember one that's you're sailing your boat across some dangerous waters, and you need a certain character who's a pirate to help you steer your ship.
The cat girl pirate.
yeah, Nora. Nora is her name.
Yep.
But for the most part, you have total freedom over your party composition. And I think the game looks really pretty as well. Like by 1991, the Famicom graphics had pretty much peaked.
And the art direction for the Monster Maker games is really fantastic, coming from the illustrations of Kugatsu Hime.
Which really, translates really to September Princess. But
really cute art style.
Yeah, it's very cute and super deformed art style. And a lot of people say that like she is probably the reason the series got as popular as it was because of her designs.
I was pretty sad to see the modern release of the card game with the updated art style.
Yeah,
it is what it is.
So yeah, that's pretty much the Nanatsu no Hiho. They just expanded everything: the game mechanics, the dungeons, more characters, more story. It's really good. So if you're gonna check out one game from the series, that's the one you should check out.
Yep, really good game.
And then came Monster Maker 2, Uru no Hiken on the Game Boy in March of 1993. And this one is more story focused compared to the previous ones, right? Like the characters now come and go in your party in accordance with the story. Do you still have any freedom to recruit characters in this one?
I don't think so. You can recruit the only in the sense of monsters and thieves, but otherwise in your actual party you can really deviate from what the game gives you. So yeah, in that sense there really is no party freedom, which is a shame.
And they also ditched the spell card system.
Yep.
So now all your spells are cast by learning them innately in like a Dragon Quest style where
Mhm.
you level up and you learn spells that way.
And you end up pretty strong with this.
Yeah,
Make the game-
it's an easier
Mhm.
one than the
Yeah.
previous two. But the style of dungeons is still the same with the
Yeah,
card
it re-
flipping and all that.
It retains the original style of dungeon crawling with the same assortment of traps and, well, card flipping and stuff.
Mhm.
That's probably its strongest point, I suppose. So the dungeon design is also a bit less involved, I feel, a bit more easy to navigate.
Mhm. Yeah. The first two were like they're not super hard, but
Mhm.
they're definitely games for experienced RPG players, I think.
Yeah.
Whereas this one is a little bit more beginner friendly. There's not as much that you have to worry about in terms of preparing your party, and the game is just generally easier.
Mhm.
But if you like the characters in the series, then the focus on story might be appealing in that sense. And I think one of the strong points of the series is actually the characters, since there are so many recurring characters throughout the series. And so, like in this game, and also Monster Maker 3, which is another fairly weak game in the series,
Mhm.
there is some appeal from seeing the characters and all the adventures they get into.
Yeah, the presentation of the game really is as good as ever. It's just that the changes in gameplay to become more standard JRPG, it's a bit,
Disappointing.
disappointing. But still, it's not a bad game at all. I enjoyed it thoroughly.
hmm So the next game released in the series is a bit of an oddball, and it's
Yeah.
one that I haven't played. It's Monster Maker Barcode Saga.
Oh, that one.
Yeah. This was published by Namco, who made the Barcode Boy,
Mhm.
which is a peripheral or accessory for the original Game Boy. It only works on the original Game Boy model, the DMG-01. And this Barcode Boy accessory basically allowed you to scan barcodes with cards that were compatible with it into the game to unlock content. In the case of Monster Maker Barcode Saga, I think there were like character cards that you scanned into the game. And it's a tactical RPG of some sort. Actually playing it is really difficult because you either need, this obscure accessory and the original Game Boy and the cards with the barcodes on it, or trying to find an emulator that actually supports this weird accessory. So that's basically
It.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I suppose barcode battlers were really popular back in the day, but there
Yeah.
really isn't much to them these days.
Yeah, so that's basically just a footnote in the series history. And the next major game was Monster Maker 3, Hikari no Majutsushi.
Yep.
Majutsushi, or the Mage of Light, released for the Super Famicom in December of 1993. And this was a pretty dramatic shift,
Yeah.
I think, from the previous games. Like, certainly Monster Maker 2 had kind of hinted at moving to a more typical RPG presentation, but this was a lot more dramatic, I think. Because they totally ditched the card flipping dungeon exploration.
Yeah.
And so the dungeons are just, your standard top down JRPG dungeons.
Mhm.
And the battle system now takes place
Yeah,
on
it's
a field where you can move your characters up, down, and left and right, and the monsters will move around as well. And in order to hit monsters, you need to get within a certain range in accordance with the weapon. Like if you're using an axe, you need to get right up in front of them. If you have a character with a bow or magic, then you can stay back. Which is I guess interesting in theory, but it's
the game's a bit of a drag to play.
Yeah.
The encounters are pretty slow and the encounter rate is pretty high for the most part. I guess you can speed up the battles, but
Mm-hmm.
still it's a bit of a chore to get through every battle, and it can get pretty messy sometimes. It can be pretty easy at times, and then you get wiped out.
Yeah,
I
the
don't know.
balancing is
Yeah.
kind of all over the place.
Mhm.
And I found because the battles are so slow and the fastest way to get through them is just to auto battle, then a lot of the time I just kind of auto battled everything. And, if I had to get over leveled to do so, then so be it. Because it's just kind of a pain in the ass to go through. And the dungeons are
Yeah.
big too.
Oh yeah.
There are some pretty big dungeons, and
Mhm.
you don't want to like spend an hour in there grinding all these encounters and then you get wiped out because something confused your whole party and killed them all at once. But there's a lot of story in this one, and it's got sort of a Dragon Quest V style of presenting its story, where there are different chapters.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Dragon Quest IV. Dragon Quest IV, the one.
Yeah, I was going to say, but wasn't sure.
Yeah. Sorry. So, yeah, it's a Dragon Quest IV kind of story
Style,
where there's different
yeah.
chapters, and each chapter focuses on a different character and their individual quests. And then in the final chapter, those characters come together for a larger main quest. And that last chapter is led by Lufia, who's a mage, young mage.
Probably maybe the most iconic character in terms of design, along with Diane, maybe.
Yeah. And Lufia's on a quest to learn magic spells from famous mages around the world. So you're just kind of going around, building up your spell library. And I mean, there's other stuff going on, but I don't remember anymore.
Honestly, I played it kind of recently, but my memory is not so good on this game. I kind of just went kind of,
I mostly remember like trying to hit flying enemies and it taking forever because their evasion is so high.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Definitely a mixed
ultimately,
bag.
I felt it's a mixed bag. It's not really that bad.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, but I don't know. It's not what I want to play a Monster Maker game for. Ultimately.
Yeah, definitely. I'm here for the card flipping.
Yeah. So that was nothing compared to the next game in the series, which is kind of where we entered the dark age of the series, I think. This was Monster Maker Yami no Ryukishi for the PC Engine CD, released in March of 1994. And this game was originally supposed to come out in 1992, but it got delayed and delayed and delayed for 2 years before they finally released it. And in the release packaging for this game, they included a piece of paper with a warning about a bug that can put you in an unwinnable state where the game is basically screwed and you can't proceed. So clearly the developers knew that this game was not ready to be released at all. And yet it had been delayed for so long that they said, screw it, let's just ship it. And there are tons of bugs. Like the battles sometimes end before you defeat all the enemies for some reason. Nobody's really sure.
Yeah.
The game can freeze. There's equipment in the game for characters, like equipment that you can buy for characters whose equipment you can't actually change. You just can never actually use these items. So it's clearly very poorly thought out. They didn't finish it. The story ends in, basically the middle of the story. The final boss is like a crab that has nothing to do with the narrative. And it says to be continued at the end. And there was supposed to be a sequel, but it never came out. So you have this broken game that ends halfway through, essentially.
I had no idea it was that bad.
It's pretty bad. It's kusoge.
Yes.
Yeah. And so that wasn't the only the sequel that didn't come out. It was not the only canceled game in the series. There was also one that was planned for the Sega Saturn. which was a tactical RPG, and there were some articles in magazines showing screenshots and explaining the game mechanics, and it looks like they got fairly far in development. It had 3D environments and 2D sprites, and it looks pretty cool. But
I haven't read
for
about
whatever reason,
how the game was supposed to work, but the presentation seems pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. So that would have been nice had we received it. But there was another game that we got on the Super Famicom in November of 1994, which I think is actually pretty decent. Although also very different for the series. It's called Monster Maker Kids Osama ni Naritai. I Want to Be the King. And this is a board game that you can play against the computer or with your friends. And you roll dice to move around a map. And there are different regions on the map, each with a castle where you can kind of take over the castle and claim that region for yourself if you complete missions that are given to you. And these missions will be things like bring a certain item to a castle or like defeat a monster that's in that region. And when you complete those missions, it earns you points, which help determine the winner at the end of the game. And there are also minor events that will appear around the map, like bosses showing up or this or that. It's kind of like a random events in board games, if you've ever played other video game board games. And those will earn you points as well. But mostly completing missions is what determines the winner. There's also a tactical mode, which differs a little bit from the main mode, and the objective is just to control as much land as possible on the map. And whenever you get control of a castle, you can assign a leader to that castle to defend it. And the stronger leaders will cost more of your money to put up there. And it's possible to steal castles from other players by defeating the leader of that castle. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it sounds like a decent enough spin-off, and with the overall aesthetics of Monster Maker and its characters, I guess it could make for a good kind of board games.
It looks really good.
Yeah.
It's got that super deformed style and really cute characters. There's cute dialogue as well. I've only played it against the computer, and I found that kind of got boring after a while. Yeah. But I think if you had like a friend or two to play with,
maybe we can net play something.
Yeah, like it's. I find the tactical mode is pretty good, although it takes a while to get started because at the start of the game nobody has control over any castles, but once everybody gets a couple under their belt and you start stealing from each other, that's when the game starts getting more interesting. But yeah, it at the very least, it's something that it stays true to the tabletop roots of the series.
Yeah,
because there were board games. I think they were called Monster Maker Dungeon Wars, the tabletop board games, and this kind of alludes to that. But yeah, I didn't play it that much, just enough to kind of get a feel for it. And then this series went quiet for a long time, about 8 years. There weren't any new games. And then finally they revived it with Monster Maker 4. Monster Maker 4 came out for the Game Boy Advance in 2002, December of 2002. And there were two versions released. One was called Flashcard and the other was called Killer Dice. And the gameplay is functionally the same between them. It's basically just a Pokemon kind of situation where there are certain cards that you can get in one version and other cards that you can only get in the other one. And if you link up between two players, you can trade cards between one another. And this is actually one of the most unique games in the series, maybe the most unique, and I think also one of the best. Although it does have some flaws and it gets kind of repetitive, just the unique system makes it very appealing. So it has a deck building system at its core, and your deck consists of 50 cards. You start with 50 at the beginning of the game, and by doing quests, you get more cards, and you kind of you're constantly adding the better cards into your deck and switching out the weaker ones. There's very little story, and you take on quests by having your fortune told and randomly getting a location for the quest, an object of interest in the quest, and an action. So, for example, you might get forest monster destroy, which means you have to go to the forest and kill a monster there. Or you might get tower treasure guard, and you have to guard a treasure of some sort. And after you get your fortune told, you meet with a quest giver who gives you a little bit more backstory about the quest. Like you might meet with the princess, and she tells you that she lost her cat, and you need to find it for her. But there's no overarching story to it, and the quests that you get are basically random. And if you go back to the fortune teller and re-roll, you can get a different quest. The dungeons themselves, they use the old card flipping system, although the dungeon design is a lot simpler. There's no trap tiles or locked doors or anything like that. It's basically just encounters and cards that you pick up as you're moving through. So the cards from your deck are randomly scattered around the dungeon, and you pick them up as you explore. You start the dungeon with 5 cards randomly drawn that go into your hand, and the party that you fight with in battle consists of character cards and monster cards that you play from your hand. So you get more monster cards by defeating monsters in battle, and there's a random chance that they'll drop their card, and then you can use that monster in battle yourself. And character cards are often gotten as quest rewards. Some of the other kind of cards are healing items, equipment, which you don't actually equip. Instead, it's like a consumable buff that you use in battle. Like if you use a shield in battle, you get an evasion buff for the rest of the battle. There are spell cards, and all of these things can be picked up in dungeons.
Well, the design for this.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that the design for this game sounds pretty interesting so far. But yeah, go ahead.
It's pretty unique. So the character and monster cards level up when you complete a quest, like in the old games. Basically, any character or monster that you used during the quest will gain a level after you beat it, even if you didn't actually use them in battle. As long as you picked up the card at some point, it'll level up. And so any monster or character can be made viable as long as you keep them at a decent level. But because there are so many different monster cards, some of them are pretty clearly better than others. And characters and monsters have skills that they can use in battle, like special attacks that'll deal more damage, or magic attacks, or inflicting status effects. And the skills cost either HP or MP, although some of them have no cost at all. And when attacking in battle, you throw a bunch of dice on the board, and if the value of the dice is greater than the enemy's evasion, the attack hits. And if you roll multiple dice that are too low, it will automatically add those dice together to get a hit. For example, if the enemy has 5 evasion and you roll a 3 and a 4, those will add together to make 7, and you'll get 1 hit out of that. And 1 die represents 1 point of damage, regardless of how much greater the actual value is. So if they've got 2 evasion and you roll a 6, it does the same amount of damage as it would if you had rolled a 3. The attacks deplete the enemy's defense first, which are represented by shields. And after their defense has been broken through, then you start attacking their hit points. and those defense points are restored at the end of each turn. So generally, you want to focus on one enemy to break through their defenses and then hit their HP on the same turn, because if you spread out too much, then you won't actually deal any damage. And where the game design starts getting kind of questionable is that the number of dice that you throw with an attack is equal to the character's current HP. And in the case of magic attacks, it's their current MP. And the reason this is so questionable is because it works both ways for monsters and yourself. So the best defense in this game is a good offense, because if you attack aggressively and deplete the enemy's HP before they attack, then they're going to throw fewer dice, and they're not going to be able to hit you as much, and they probably won't even break through your defense points. And you generally act before the enemy does, unless they use a skill that executes quickly, because different skills have different speeds associated with them. So once you recognize that the best tactics in battle are just to be as aggressive as possible, the game becomes pretty easy. Aside from those few enemies that will just wipe out your entire party with a multi-target attack on the first turn, which happens to me a few times so far. But you learn from that, and you can identify that monster and put them to sleep on the first turn or whatever, and proceed that way. So the quests are pretty simple. The dungeons don't have a whole lot going on. And because it's all basically random, the gameplay does get kind of repetitive. But for a handheld game that you play in short sessions for like half hour, maybe an hour at the most, it's kind of enjoyable. And building up your deck gradually with each quest is a lot of fun. And just the whole unique system, I think, makes this one of the most interesting games in the series. And kind of feels like a return to form.
Yeah.
For this series, since it had been going in a more generic direction previously. When they picked it back up, they really paid homage to the card game roots in a way that's both unique and interesting.
Sounds pretty good.
So that's basically
Yeah.
Monster Maker 4. There had also been some games on the PC-98, the first of which came out in 1993, and this was just like a straight-up simulation of the tabletop card game. So if you want to play against a computer, you can do that. There was also one called Monster Maker Magic Master, which was like a tactical RPG, Fire Emblem style, which I haven't played myself, but I watched a bit of gameplay on Nico Nico Doga, and it looks, it looks like a tactical RPG. If you're into those games, then you could try it. And then there was a novel game called Digital Novel Game Watashi wa Dare, released for the PC-98 in 1996, and I couldn't find very much information about this one. So I'm not actually sure if there's even visual graphics in this. I think it might just be a text-only game, because I couldn't find any screenshots at all. But it apparently it has branching paths, and that's about all that I know.
Yeah.
And then there was the mobile game, Monster Maker I, which was released in the early 2000s for mobile phones with iMode network support. And the iMode was like a mobile phone network that was very popular in Japan, and they tried to launch it in a few other countries, but it never really caught on like it did in Japan. So it's very hard to actually play this game. You need to have an old phone that can connect to the network and live in Japan.
There
if
really
the
hasn't been
surface is
much preservation for these old mobile
yeah,
games.
and I think it's really a shame, because if you look into the history of like the iMode mobile games in Japan, there were a lot of these in established franchises. Like not only Monster Maker, but there was a Metal Saga iMode game. There was the Quest of Kai iMode version.
Oh yeah.
There was an Idolmaster game. There were a lot of a lot of games that we really can't play now because there's no preservation of them. And I feel like nowadays game preservation in general is starting to be taken more seriously. And there are groups who are working to preserve like old prototypes and magazines and so forth. But mobile preservation is still very much a fringe topic.
Yeah.
And I think most people either don't really care about it or they don't realize how much is out there that's at risk of being lost or has already been lost. Because the average person can't, get these old obscure phones and travel to Japan just to play a Monster Maker game.
Yeah.
But this was actually a pretty popular mobile game. Apparently, according to the official website, it had 100,000 downloads.
Wow.
Which is not too shabby for the time. And looking at the gameplay, it seems like it has the old card flipping dungeon exploration style. So it's something that seems pretty cool. But I might never be able to play it.
Yeah. Well, it's not that surprising since Monster Maker does seem to be quite a maybe well-known franchise in Japan. Like not only the beta games.
Oh yeah, I think it's more popular as a tabletop
as a card
series
game,
even today. Yeah, and if you go on Pixiv, you'll still find people like drawing pictures of these characters, even though there hasn't been any releases of the series in like over a decade. So there's a lot of love from the fans still, and maybe we'll get some kind of gacha revival at some point, but I wouldn't bet on it. So that is the Monster Maker series. I hope you enjoy learning about it, and if it sounds like your thing, I highly recommend checking out the Natsu no Hiho on the Famicom.
Really good game.
Really good game. Or any of the others that sound like your thing. Check them out, and if you enjoyed them, please let us know. Because we really would like to help spread the word and help people find things that they didn't know they could enjoy. So, did you have any closing thoughts?
Not really. Just hoping for a Monster Maker revival at this point because it's a really good series, and even in gacha form, I guess I will take it.
I feel like that would be. I feel like if the series is going to come back, that's the way they're going to do it.
Yeah, and it does sound viable. Like
there's a lot of characters. There's a lot of collectability there.
Yep.
So that's going to be it for this episode. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for listening.
And thanks for we'll see you next time. Take care.
Take care.